For the past month or so, I've been thinking a lot about friendship. And actually, I suppose that I've always thought a lot about friendship. I grew up moving from place to place. In childhood, I had to form new friendships often. Interestingly, my sister has a bit of a different story. Our family found its roots in Santa Rosa, California, when my sister was beginning 4th grade and I was beginning 8th grade. I was already used to the idea that friendships come and go. But my sister found her best friend in her 4th grade class. Now today, not only do my sister and her best friend still live a short drive from one another, they both have baby daughters that are only months apart in age. So my now 4-month-old niece was born into an arranged best friendship, which I think is kind of cool. So there are so many different experiences of friendship, even within the same family. About a month ago, I was speaking with a colleague, a fellow rabbi, and he was explaining that it's very common for congregational rabbis to feel isolated. Logically, the reasons make sense. Often, a congregational rabbi will need to move to relocate to a new city to serve their congregation. In this new place, they might not know anyone, might not have any social connections outside their synagogue. And of course, their job will keep them busy. It's possible for rabbis in these sorts of situations to make and maintain friendships, but often it's not easy. So after this conversation, I kept reflecting on it, and I tried to figure out what it was about the conversation itself that made me remember and revisit it and try to unpack it more. Well, for one thing, the colleague that was making this statement wasn't coming from a place of, I figured this out, my life is perfect, all you have to do are these 3 simple things and you can be successful just like me. I feel like we've all heard advice coming from a place like that, and it's not always so helpful. This conversation was very different. The colleague was trying to figure out things for himself and his own family. He was in the midst of it, and he was open about the challenges he personally was going through. So for me, the conversation felt like an invitation to problem solving, an invitation to exploration, not just about the life of rabbis, but also about the meaning of friendship. And so this problem-solving project has been simmering gently on a back burner in my brain and soul for a few weeks now. On the one hand, this problem is a logistical problem, but on the other hand, this is a problem about feeling and understanding. So here's the logistical part. This theoretical person experiencing isolation. It could be a rabbi, but honestly, it could really be anybody. There's a number of factors contributing to this situation. Living in a new place, having a job that has a lot of responsibilities, including working nights and weekends, being on call, and their role in the community, their title, is always a piece of who they are. It affects all their relationships. So as we're puzzling out this problem, we can't really change any of these factors. So we have to change something else. In my solving this problem, thinking about this, I have to change something else. And so I started thinking about and understanding friendship with a new definition. Because it's easy for me to think that the definition of friendship has to be very narrow. For example, it only counts as friendship if you met in 4th grade, or if you had an arranged best friendship since birth, or if the friendship began before you became a rabbi. I think that some of my colleagues as well end up defining friendship from a very narrow perspective. And so what if, I thought, the definition of friendship could instead be very expansive? What if friendship was redefined as one moment of shared connection? Now that can move the needle from impossible to very, very doable. With this definition, friendship is possible in so many different scenarios. There's no extensive program of pre-qualification. There's no required maintenance of a certain number of coffee dates every month or every year. Instead of collecting an appropriate number of a certain type of relationships and maintaining them, the goal is different: to experience as much shared human connection as possible. So going about my business over the past month or so, simmering around these ideas in my mind and in my soul, and then we get to this past Thursday. I'm in Newmark Hall, it's 9 a.m., I'm with a lovely group of people. There's a lot of really lovely connection going on. And this is our weekly Torah study. I know that some of you haven't ever attended this gathering. Of course, others of you come regularly. So some of you already know, but I'll try to explain now to those who don't. It's not really a class. It's more like a very engaged and very wandering group conversation. We call it study, we call it learning, because these are the customary Jewish verbs for this type of activity involving Torah. But we don't try to memorize anything or even really walk out with bullet points about the parashah. It's more about experiencing a connection with Torah and about experiencing connections with one another. So we're talking about this week's parashah, Parashat Shoftim, which goes into detail about justice and law and leadership. And I think this particular conversation started with the part of the parashah that we actually heard read this morning so beautifully, that speaks about the Jewish people establishing a king in their society. So it turns out this instruction in the parashah is interpreted in two different ways. One interpretation, it's mandatory to establish a king. The other, it's optional to establish a king. So I think this was the starting point of how we got to where we got. There were some hops and skips and jumps, and I admit I don't exactly remember the path we took, but I do remember the moment when someone around the table said the following: aren't our mitzvot supposed to be doable? I was really surprised by this. It was like the record scratch sound effect in my head when everything stopped all of a sudden. Because here's the thing. I talk to people about mitzvot kind of a lot. I try to live my life by the mitzvot, and I've been trying to do that for a while now. And I have to say, those experiences have not demonstrated to me that the mitzvot are particularly doable. So I responded, I don't think the mitzvot are supposed to be doable. I think the mitzvot are supposed to be challenging. Someone else around the table added, then, there are actually a bunch of mitzvot that we literally can't do right now because we don't have a holy temple in Jerusalem, which indeed is technically correct. So then I said, and I definitely meant it, I'm going to be thinking more about this conversation. What is the overlap between doable and challenging? God wants us to do the mitzvot, so they at least have to be possible, right? There's this teaching in the Talmud that if all the Jewish people together observed Shabbat just twice in a row, the world would be immediately redeemed. That is, this collective action of doing mitzvot would result in complete repair of the world. Is this challenging or doable? Eventually, I continued to ponder over this. It occurred to me that there's a whole different approach to doing mitzvot that is not practiced by communities like ours, but nevertheless, probably all of us have heard about, all of us are familiar with. This approach starts with a question like, have you put on tefillin today? Or it starts with someone giving you 2 Shabbat candles to light on Friday night. This is an approach to mitzvot that frames mitzvot as doable. Just let me wrap your strap around the arm like this. Just make sure to light these candles right at a certain time. And I started to see a parallel between this dialogue about mitzvot and my internal dialogue about friendship. Are mitzvot challenging or doable? Is friendship about a particular type of relationship, or is friendship simply a moment of human connection? Interestingly, the word mitzvah, which we read in the Torah to mean commandment or instruction, is used and understood a bit differently once we get to the Talmud later on in Jewish history. It gets 2 new meanings. First, a good deed, which still has that meaning today, and second, a connection. So we start to develop this understanding in Jewish life that a mitzvah is a moment of connection. I guess the thing with connection is, whether it's a friendship or a mitzvah, it doesn't really work if you force it. Connection only comes when you feel it. Part of what I've reflected on over the past month as I've reflected on friendship is a couple of friendships in my life that have been changing, have been fading. It's not that the friendship was never real. Those friendships were and are real. But because of various things in life that are different now, the connection isn't the same as it used to be. I've had to admit to myself, it's possible to schedule a coffee date on the calendar, but it doesn't guarantee a feeling of connection. It doesn't mean that I want to stop talking to the person, but it does mean that things change, that connection sometimes changes, and that can be both hard and okay. So for a moment, back to mitzvot. I can't say I've ever had the experience of someone approaching me on the street and asking me whether I've put on tefillin today. But recently, I did have 2 different conversations with 2 completely different people who had this experience. So one person, this is a person who's not really in the habit of doing a bunch of mitzvot. He had the experience and he thought it was kind of cool, a little disorienting. He didn't really make plans to do anything like that again, but nevertheless, it was a good experience, a positive impact, definitely a moment of connection. So the other person, someone who's very, very well aware of the mitzvot, completely opposite experience. To him, it felt very invasive. He was explaining that when this happened, he wasn't on the street, he was actually in a kosher supermarket shopping for Shabbat. He was engaged in the mitzvah of buying kosher food. He was well aware of the obligation to put on tefillin, but he wasn't going to do that mitzvah in that exact moment. He had his own reasons, none of which he was particularly interested in sharing with the gentleman who was trying literally to foist the tefillin upon him. Needless to say, this was not a moment of connection. The more I think about these two concepts, mitzvot and friendship, the more I appreciate how they're both simple and elusive. There are so many different types of mitzvot in so many areas of life. And we humans are social creatures. We interact with one another kind of constantly. It seems like it should be super simple to do mitzvot and experience friendship all the time. But for some of us, maybe even most of us, it's not always that way. So my blessing for us in the week ahead, as we approach these simple yet elusive experiences, is that we notice and lean into our moments of connection. Maybe this week it might make you feel connected to say the Shema at bedtime or to prepare a special food for Shabbat. Maybe this week you might share a smile with a neighbor or a funny conversation with a person you happen to meet when you're out doing errands. Maybe this week you'll call up your best friend and catch up on all that's new in life. Whenever we can move out of our feeling of isolation and experience a feeling of connection, we're truly blessed. Shabbat Shalom.